Hello and welcome to Autology, the weekly podcast that brings you the very latest on automotive technology. This week's episode is called Consumer Sentiment Towards In-Vehicle Displays and Other HMI Features. We're here today with me, Aaron Dale, and Jana Mills, Supply Chain and Technology Consumer Research Lead, alongside Carl Davis, Senior Analyst for Connected Car and Vehicle Experience. Hello to both of you, and thank you for joining this week's episode.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Great. So this week's podcast is all about the consumer sentiment, particularly around in-vehicle displays. So the first question I have today is fairly straightforward. What displays do consumers want within their vehicle?
Right to the point. I love it. So what our consumer surveys have been telling us is that bigger is not always better. We're seeing OEMs obviously getting bolder and flashier with some of their displays and the configurations, to the point that they're taking up the entire center stack or even the entire dash. So it's certainly all the rage to have these massive infotainments featuring larger and larger screens. And it obviously goes without saying that having a large enough, easy to use and easy to see display while driving is crucial. But while these concepts and even some of these production ready displays are pretty cool, they're certainly novel in their appearance, consumers seem to prefer more of the medium-sized displays of 6 to 10 inches. And of course, this tends to vary by region because we did find consumers in China were far more accepting of the larger sizes of about 11 inches and up. But overall, we see that the preference for medium-sized displays could be attributed to a couple of things. And first is perhaps consumers find the larger sizes to just be unnecessary. They might be overwhelming. They could be distracting even. A second reason may just be the lack of exposure to some of these larger sizes. And they just might not have a reference point in their experience to sort of compare it to. But there are still those who want those larger displays, as we've seen with Chinese respondents. But the overall display configuration determines how big of a display OEMs can squeeze in, right? So the next preferred size, which we surveyed, was the 11 to 15 inch range. And we found that a multi-display module configuration was often the most preferred interior design over other designs like an A-pillar to A-pillar or just a large center stack with a separate cluster. So a multi-display module would be something like the configuration you find in the Cadillac Escalade or the Mercedes-Benz A-Class, where the instrument cluster and the center stack appear under one piece of cover glass. And obviously, displays aren't just there to look pretty, right? They're functional, and they're often used as an input for users to interact with via touchscreen capabilities. So we've seen an uptick in both touchscreen usage and overall sentiments towards them. In our survey, we found that touchscreens were the #1 preferred input method for nearly all functions, with the exception of phone calling. Generally, consumers have had an increasingly positive or a favorable opinion of touchscreens, but typical concerns have remained that stem from potential driver distraction and functionality issues like poor responsiveness or entry errors. And with some of these concerns obviously still relevant today, consumers might be more interested in touchscreens, but they want them with a combination of buttons or knobs. So it's really up to the OEMs to find that right balance without having to alienate certain customer groups. But if we were to just look at the overall sentiments on built-in displays or the infotainment systems, our respondents claim that they enhance and improve the overall driving experience. And ultimately, they're starting to play an increasingly more important role in the purchasing decision for a new vehicle.
So it's interesting. It's interesting to learn a little bit about the refined taste of the consumer, and it's all not just about the hype and the arms race that we see around increasingly larger displays in the vehicle, and that consumers, increasingly balance the usability of the system. So this brings me on to other displays such as head-up display. We see this in our forecast. We see significant growth. We see a lot of activity in the supply chain and for OEMs. Perhaps Kyle, you can comment here on how the consumers are perceiving, head-up display and other displays in the vehicle.
Yeah, sure. So I'll just focus on head-up displays here. This is always one of the most interesting portions of the consumer survey that we run every year for a couple reasons. So if we just look at the awareness of the head-up display, we first of all split it up into location. So windscreen, which would be the head-up display being projected directly on the windshield, and then a combiner HUD, which is not as common, but it basically has a small piece of glass that appears between the windscreen and the driver's field of view. So of the awareness of consumers on these two products, 28% of consumers have heard of and driven a car with a windscreen HUD, compared to 20% of consumers have heard of and driven a car with a combiner HUD. But when we're talking about just hearing of these technologies and not necessarily driving a vehicle with them, it's nearly a 50-50 split. So really, why does this matter? Every year when we run this consumer survey, we continue to see a trend of when you're getting the consumer in front of a head-up display, particularly a windscreen HUD, it impacts the vehicle purchase decision of the consumer by over 60%, which is pretty phenomenal here. And we're just talking about, your standard windscreen box HUDs here. I think in the future, as we transition more to augmented reality head-up displays, we're really going to see those drive consumer purchase intention even higher. So these specific augmented reality head-up displays entered the market last year or 2 years ago, and they are in a very small amount of nameplates, with the Mercedes-Benz S-Class being one of them, the Cadillac upcoming Lyric being another one. And this has been a very hot topic in automotive for almost over a decade now. But despite all of this talk about AR HUDs and how they're going to change the user experience, we only have them passing 1 million units in 2026. And despite that milestone mark for the AR HUD, the total HUDs in the market in 2026 will be about 17 million. So the others being compromised of the smaller box HUDs that don't have the augmented reality features in them. So really, like, what's keeping augmented reality head-up displays back? Well, there's a couple of issues. One would be the overall package size of the AR head-up display. It's very difficult for a vehicle designer to just drop in a component that's between 20 and 25 liters in the instrument panel without doing some major reconfiguration of other components in the vehicle. And the other one would be price. Obviously, margin is king in automotive, and these AR HUDs are quite pricey now. But as we continue to drive volume up, the overall price will be down, which will motivate the OEMs to get those into vehicles. And I think this is particularly important because we also surveyed the consumer on what the most important content displayed on a head-up display is. And I have the top 5 here, and they are navigation guidance, vehicle-centric information, collision avoidance and blind spot detection, speed limit, and lane guidance. And while all of these can be shown on a traditional box HUD without moving in a AR fashion, it does enhance driver experience if you're able to move these around, especially as we're moving more and more up the levels of autonomy and having more ADAS systems in the vehicle. It's been proven that there's a direct correlation between more of a driver safety feel with a head-up display.
That's very interesting, especially the focus now around kind of safety for the first implementations of AR HUD, and the perception from the consumer base there as well. Jana, perhaps from your side, are there any other displays to consider within this?
Yeah, absolutely. We also surveyed on the topic of camera displays. And so things like the side camera mirror replacements and rear view camera display mirrors, both of these are high definition displays. And I guess to define them a little bit more is that the side camera mirror replacement is a wide camera view of the side mirror perspective, which actually replaces the physical mirror. The rear view does just that. It shows the view from behind the vehicle. So both of them function very much like their name would suggest. And so these are features that are just starting to make their way into the market. I mean, even in the US, their side view mirror replacements aren't actually allowed yet. So they're very fresh. And ultimately, what our surveys have found is that a large number of consumers have still either heard of or used either one of these displays, but that most were interested in a rear view camera display over a side view. But as far as willingness to pay, there was very little difference here in what they would be willing to pay for either one, maybe just like a $4 difference between that and the rear view. So there are other display types, obviously, in the vehicle that are starting to penetrate the market, but obviously a little limited in deployment currently. And I think from a pure functionality standpoint, we're starting to see a stronger preference for center stack displays. When it comes to output preferences, we see that they're pretty function specific. For example, radio or media playback, phone calling, texting, different in-vehicle apps, or navigation and safety systems. And what we found was that center stack displays were the #1 preferred output for nearly all functions. And the only ones that center stack displays did not come in first were in functions that showed traditional vehicle and driving status content, which instrument clusters were more preferred, and they're traditionally served in that function. So in addition to that is that in general, we see a growing preference for instrument clusters as well, which we can expect moving forward as more of these digital instrument clusters start to enter vehicles as well.
And that's very, very interesting. I mean, particularly on the camera display topic. I mean, fundamentally, users have been using a typical physical mirror for 100 years plus. So that represents a big shift to the way users interact with the vehicle. So it's interesting to see perhaps early indications of good sentiment on the rear view application, and perhaps extended into the side view in the future. So looking beyond displays, so what were some of the interesting results found around what consumers wanted in terms of general HMI and other features?
Yeah, I can take this one. So as far as desirability goes, obviously, infotainment systems and head-up displays were pretty highly desired, but they were still only second and third because we found that the #1 most highly desired feature globally was wireless charging. 72%, nearly 3/4 of our global respondents found wireless charging to be the most desirable feature when considering their next vehicle purchase. And looking at specific regions, there were some variations. We found that our European respondents in the UK and Germany found infotainment systems most desirable, while those in mainland China and India wanted branded audio systems. We found respondents in Brazil and Japan sort of led the way with wireless charging preferences. But it was both respondents in the US and South Korea that were most similar in that a tie emerged between wireless charging and remote start. So, and some of the least desired features included things like gesture recognition, passenger displays, and rear seat entertainment, which was pretty consistent across the board or across all of the surveyed markets. And so we can attribute some of these results with the highest and lowest desired features to deployment or fitments and use case. And some of these features may have limited deployment, which would be the case for gesture recognition, but also having passenger displays and rear seat entertainment suits a pretty specific use case that perhaps not every consumer needs, right? As expected, in our results, a majority of those that indicated desirability for a passenger display or rear seat entertainment were also those that had one or more children under the age of 18 living in the household. So again, you kind of need a passenger to need these technologies, and not every consumer needs that.
Yeah, I'll quickly chime in here. One thing that I found interesting about this survey is that the most desired features can be almost categorized by those of which make the consumer's life easier. I mean, you talk about wireless charging and remote start. I mean, those are two convenience features that are pretty popular nowadays. And as you mentioned, Yana, passenger displays and rear seat entertainment, either they don't have the deployment right now, so that consumers aren't as aware of them, or they're just not as desired because they're not getting as much use. Another thing that I found interesting about this survey is almost the inverse between the most desired features and the willingness to pay. So for example, we already mentioned wireless charging having the highest desired feature of 72% globally. However, it came in at the lowest willingness to pay at 56 US dollars. So what does this really mean is that consumers are expecting this in their next vehicle and they don't want to pay extra for it, which is going to be interesting because we already see some OEMs testing features such as BMW with Apple CarPlay, making the user pay for it. Obviously, that did not go over too well because consumers are just so used to having these as standard features in the vehicle. It's going to be interesting to see in the future how OEMs package these not only connected services, but also updates and features in the vehicle that some consumers are used to having standard in the vehicle.
So surprised actually to see gesture recognition and also passengers displays, particularly in rear seat entertainment, feature on some of the least desirable features for consumers. I mean, it's a topic and an area that's certainly been getting a lot of attention lately. So interested to learn your thoughts around perhaps why these are polling amongst some of the least desired features in the vehicle.
Yeah, so just for a couple numbers for context here. So the consumer survey data shows that 53% of consumers had somewhat of a desire for a passenger display in the front seat, and 51% had a desire for rear seat entertainment, which is the lowest among the 13 features we asked the consumer about. So this kind of goes along with my initial hypothesis a few years ago, when I thought that passenger displays, especially in the front seat, were only a fad, that we would see at shows like CES just to garner media attention. And I thought this because nowadays, most everyone has a small computer in their pocket called a phone. And there's really nothing on the surface that my phone can't do that a passenger display or rear seat entertainment can do. But obviously we see these continue to enter more and more vehicles, whether it be the BMW theater screen, it's entered the Jeep Grand Wagoneer in the front seat. So I've talked to a lot of people in the industry and really trying to figure out what benefits does a passenger display actually have. And I've got two main ones. One would be gaming. So if you have the ability to game with everyone else in the car, obviously, except the driver at once, that's a good bonding experience for everyone in the car. And then two would be video streaming and movie watching, to be able to not have to hold a phone or a tablet or a computer, and just kind of sit back and relax, almost like you're at home, and be able to watch a video or a movie or YouTube. Those are kind of the features that we're really going to see OEMs continue to hammer home to provide use cases for these passenger displays.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see that some of these systems haven't realised their full potential as of yet, and excited to see what comes next in that arena. So just before we wrap up today's episode, I'd be interested to know, if we think about a little bit further out, let's say 5 years, how do we think that consumer sentiment may change over that time?
Yeah, I think maybe in general, the more some of these technologies start to trickle into the volume brands or the mainstream brands, from the premium and the luxury segments, the more consumer sentiments will change. repeated exposure is sort of the key with some of these technologies, to obviously to an extent. And as a result, I think we'll see greater awareness leading to more interest and higher desirability scores for some technologies like larger center stack displays, more HUDs. But also keep in mind that the more these come equipped in volume vehicles, the less consumers will probably be willing to pay for them. It's sort of an association that as these features become more prominent, they become an expectation, like Kyle mentioned. And I think we'll also see more interest in different display configurations, possibly, and some interesting variations or applications for these displays, again, like Kyle mentioned with passenger displays and rear seat entertainment.
Yeah, from my end, I'm really going to be keeping an eye on two main points. The first being how consumers continue to want head-up displays and how augmented reality head-up displays are going to change that. I think that if OEMs continue to implement not only box HUDs, but also augmented reality head-up displays into vehicles, we're really going to see consumer sentiment for augmented reality head-up displays and just head-up displays in general go up. And the second being that there will be less of a focus on the size of display and rather what the OEM is doing with display real estate. As Yana mentioned to start off this podcast, it seems like there's a sweet spot of 6 to 10 inches for consumers right now for a center stack display in the vehicle. But the size range of 11 to 15 wasn't too far behind. So if an OEM can prove that they're doing enough on the back end and providing enough valuable information on a larger display, then we're going to continue to see consumers want a larger display in the vehicle. And I think, Aaron, I'd actually like your perspective on this, since you are also a vehicle experience analyst here at the company. What do you think is going to really change for consumer sentiment over the next 5 years?
Yeah, no, I think you raised a good point there. I think that consumer sentiment is also driven by OEM activity as well. I mean, particularly. If you look at some of the more conservative regions, such as Europe, where I'm based, you see that that risk of alienating a customer base is very real. So that OEMs try to balance the introduction of new technologies, but where we see the carving out of some of these sub brands like the Mercedes EQ and VW ID, for example, you see a safe space to really implement some of these new technologies, and within while kind of showcasing the capabilities and really driving out the new features. I think that this will open up a new market and really it really increase consumer kind of sentiment and of those technologies kind of over time. So I think there's a lot of new exciting features to be kind of fulfilled, and we'll continue to see innovation over the next 5 years, and that will translate to consumer interest here. So I mean, with that, unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. And I'd like to say a big thank you to both Yana and Kyle for joining this episode.
Yeah, thank you again. It was fun.
Thank you both.
Yes, it was. Looking forward to joining more podcasts in the future.
Sounds good. And also, thank you to all the listeners here tuning in with us today as well. We'd also love to hear your thoughts on today's episode, which you can let us know via autology@ihsmarket.com, and also find out much more information on autotechinsight.ihsmarket.com. Don't forget to hit the subscribe, follow, and like buttons to stay on track with the latest Autology podcasts. We look forward to you joining us here for the next episode. But for now, goodbye and thank you for joining.